Sean Strickland is now the UFC middleweight champion of the world. Coming into his fight against Israel Adesanya at UFC 293, he was a plus 440 underdog, which meant that people overall were not giving him a big chance to win against the champion. So in what seemed to be a fight where no one, including myself, was giving Sean Strickland a chance to beat one of the best middleweights in UFC history, he proved everyone wrong and produced one of the biggest upsets in not only UFC history, but also MMA history. Sean Strickland not only beat Israel Adesanya, but he beat him playing Adesanya's own game. In some of Izzy's recent outings, he was more inclined to cruise through the fight by keeping his opponents at range and doing just enough to win each round by point fighting. This led to some of the most boring title fights in the modern fight era, and drew criticism from a lot of fans. So when Sean Strickland came in and dropped Israel Adesanya in the first round, and proceeded to outpoint Israel Adesanya for 3 more rounds, it came as a shock to everyone watching. You guys probably already know the stats behind this fight, and how Israel Adesanya only landed 34% of his significant strikes against Sean Strickland. But what if I told you that this performance by Sean Strickland is actually even better than you originally thought? In contrast to the last video, where I was making an opinion based on stats and observations for a fight that might not even happen, in this video, we're going to go over stats of a fight that already happened. A fight that made Israel Adesanya look like, in Sean Strickland's words, an amateur. Before we go into the statistics of this particular fight, I think it's important we first analyze the strike distribution and strike accuracies of both Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland's overall careers. I'm doing this to give you all some perspective on both fighters to show their main objectives when they fight. In contrast to last video's pie chart, we're going to use a sunburst chart to combine strike lands and attempts. Starting with the former champion Israel Adesanya's strike distribution. You can see that Izzy's main objective in his fights in the UFC is to attack to the head. It also mixes in his leg kicks, roundhouses to the body, and general body shots. He sometimes attempts to strike to the head in a few ways, whether that be through high kicks, jabs, but as we've seen more recently, it's mainly been through single jabs, crosses, and hooks at a distance, and not in some combo of those. If you look at the significant strikes landed per minute on the UFC website and compare it to Jamal Hill's from last video, this number is almost half of that. Moving over to the bar charts to see the strike accuracy of each target more closely, we can see Izzy lands his strikes at a rate of 82% to the leg, 67% to the body, and 35% to the head. He also has attempted almost 1,600 strikes to the head in his 16-fight UFC career. Going over to Sean Strickland, we see something quite a bit different. From the strike distribution sunburst chart, we can see that Strickland's overwhelming objective is to hit you in the head. And this is usually done with his 1-2s, or in other words, the jab cross. Moving over to the bar charts again, we can see in his 20 fights in the UFC, he's landed over 1,400 strikes to the head at an accuracy of around 38%. He's attempted over 2,000 more strikes to the head than Izzy, but then again, he also has 4 more fights than him. Now we get into the juice of the video. So why was Sean Strickland's performance against Israel Adesanya so amazing? Let's dive deep into the stats behind this fight. As mentioned earlier in the video, the stats that were thrown around initially after the fight had happened was that Izzy only landed 34% of his significant strikes against Sean Strickland. But if we expand that number to show the main targets of Israel Adesanya in this fight, we see something even worse. As you can see from the bar chart, Izzy only landed 14% of his strikes to the head in this fight. The majority of his accuracy actually came from his body shots and leg kicks. I mean, if that number doesn't shock you, then maybe this will. If we recombine all the strike lands and attempts back into one and look back at Israel Adesanya's career in the UFC, we actually see that in this fight, this was the least accurate he's been with his strikes ever. This number is only right below Izzy's fight against Yoel Romero, but what made it even worse than that fight is that not only did Izzy lose here, but also Izzy attempted and landed almost double of what he did against Yoel Romero in 5 rounds, and it was still the least accurate he's ever been. Okay, we understand that maybe this was Izzy's worst performance in his career, but what about Sean Strickland? Was this the best performance of his career? Well, let's dive deep into his stats for this fight. As mentioned earlier, Sean Strickland's overall UFC strike accuracy to the head is around 38%, and when we look at the strike accuracy to the head of his fight with Izzy, we see that he landed them at a rate of around 45%. His strike accuracy to the leg and body is similar to his overall percentage. So I guess you can say from these graphs that his performance against Izzy was above average. And when you compare it with the rest of his fights, you can say it sort of stands out. In fact, it's the second most accurate he's been with his strikes in his UFC career, only falling short to his performance against Brendan Allen, which, at the time, was an unranked catchweight bout. The reason I'm omitting Sean Strickland's fight with Robert McDaniel is shown on screen. Where it gets a little more interesting is when you analyze Sean Strickland's strike defense for this fight and compare it with the rest of them. As you can see from the chart, there's a lot of numbers. So let me condense it a little to just show Sean Strickland's fights at middleweight while he's in the top 15. Now, as you can see from the chart, this was in fact Sean Strickland's best display of strike defense amongst the top 15 in the middleweight division of the UFC. And as previously mentioned, Sean Strickland received 34% of the significant strikes Izzy attempted on him, or in other words, he had a strike defense of around 66%. But something is still off with this number, in particular with the leg kicks that were received from Sean Strickland in this fight, which contributed to the overall significant strike count. I remember seeing Joe Rogan's Fight Companion after, and he made a comment about how good Sean Strickland's checking of Izzy's leg kicks were. So when I browsed the UFC stats website and saw that Sean Strickland still received 34 out of the 57 leg kicks that Israel Adesanya attempted, I knew something was up. So I went back and rewatched the fight on UFC Fight Pass and manually counted each leg kick check from Sean Strickland and input that data into my graphs. Now before I show you that data, I need to give a brief overview of what a leg kick check is and why I counted it the way that I did. In Muay Thai, a check is a way to defend against a roundhouse or a low kick. Traditionally, this is done by raising your knee with the leg you're checking a kick with to the inside of your elbow and pointing the shin outwards toward the opponent's shin on the kick. This is supposed to reduce the impact of the incoming kick and also hurt the opponent as they would be going shin to shin with you. However, in modern MMA, fighters get away with just raising their front or back leg with a light tilt to reduce the damage of the incoming kick. You see this with fighters such as Charles Oliveira, Jan Blachowicz, and Alex Pereira. In Sean Strickland's fight against Israel Adesanya, he did a variation of the modern leg kick check by raising just the front leg to reduce damage. And that's how I counted those to contribute in Sean Strickland's new leg kick defense. So after rewatching the fight, Sean Strickland's leg strike defense percentage went from this to this, an almost 20% increase in leg kick defense, and in turn bringing Izzy's strike accuracy that I showed earlier from this to this. And when you crunch all these new numbers up, we find out that Israel Adesanya didn't land 34% of his significant strikes, but instead landed less than 30% of his significant strikes against Sean Strickland. So to wrap it all up, was Israel Adesanya off in his fight with Sean Strickland? Based on these statistics, my opinion is no. Sean Strickland just had an amazing performance at UFC 293 against Israel Adesanya, and is rightfully deserving of the UFC middleweight belt. I'm not only excited for the potential future that Sean Strickland has in the horizon, but also how Israel Adesanya bounces back from this performance, and if he can make the right adjustments to get back to fighting the top of the division. Once again, any additional data, including those sunburst charts used in the thumbnail, will be available on the Instagram page. If you like the content, consider subscribing, liking the video, and dropping a comment down below for discussion or suggestions on the next video. And one last thing before I go, I'm really grateful for the amount of support everyone gave me on the first video. Because of you guys, we reached over 10,000 views and over 300 subscribers in around 10 days since its release. The first video wasn't even meant to blow up the way it did, considering that Jamal Hill and Alex Pereira aren't even scheduled to fight yet. And even then, Alex Pereira has to go through Yuri Prochazka first before even thinking of a fight with Jamal Hill. But one thing that I did have in making that video was passion. And I hope to bring that same passion not just for that video, but for this one and future videos to come. If you haven't watched that video yet, there will be a link in the description, or something should pop up now. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.